Hello, my name is Kayah Brown, and this is my charged tapes lab for Physics 2212. So the table of contents, we have the introduction, which has the background information, the model, and the experiment, and conclusion. So as for our introduction, we're seeking to explore a lot of these basic physics concepts such as charge, which is a property of matter, just how different charges interact with each other, if they're repellent or attractive towards each other, and for what reason. We're also looking to design an experiment using half-stabbed objects, in this case, a ruler, a roll of tape, and a desk. We also are wanting to make assumptions, so essentially we can explain these important physics concepts. And another thing we want to figure out with this experiment is the amount of excess charge on everyday objects. Background information, we need to understand Coulomb's law as well as Newton's second law. So Coulomb's law is very integral to physics too. So essentially we're trying to create the electric force between two objects. And in the next slide, I can explain it further because I'll have the entire equation. We also need to know about Newton's second law, which is force equals mass times acceleration. We also need to know about attractive and repellent forces. So why do certain forces attract and why do certain forces repel? So we have Newton's second law here, and then we also have Coulomb's law. So Coulomb's law, we have our constant K times the charge on each object. So we have Q1 and Q2, so it's measuring the force between two stationary charges. So we need to know the charge for each one. And then we have R squared, which is pretty much the distance between these 2 points, exactly like the observational distance. So the assumptions that we're making here for this experiment to run smoothly, we are assuming air resistance is not within the scope of this experiment. We're treating U-tape as having a point charge in the center, and the U-tape is what we're using in this experiment, is that piece of tape, and we're assuming that it's just a single point charge. Additionally, we are assuming that each piece of tape has the same amount of charge, evenly distributed, which is really important for our calculations. Essentially, we can reduce the charge just to one charge squared. So we have our glow script code, which is pretty much a simulator. It simulates just exactly what we're looking for, and it does the calculations. And as you can see below, it also has the magnitude of the charge on one piece of tape as calculated by our computational model. So we also have the computational model here and a couple of calculations that our code found. And we have the experiment. So the purpose of the simulation which is supposed to show just kind of like what we would see or what we would expect from the experiment, just to show that relationship between the two, we input all the data from the experiment and treat the two pieces of tape as a point charge just to see how they would behave in the simulation. So now we have the experiment itself. So we have two pieces of tape and we charge these two pieces of tape, and then we observe their behavior when they interact with other objects, when they interact with each other, neutral objects, and essentially the objective of this experiment is to measure the amount of excess charge on the U-tape when they are a certain distance apart. So we have the math here where I calculated the excess charge. So I pretty much equaled the force of gravity on tape B as a point charge equal to the force of the electric field. So we equal those two together and insert their respective equations. So one is mass times gravity and the other one is Coulomb's law. And then I pretty much solve for the unknown value, which is the charge of the tape. So we also have the expectations results, which are all like the measurements taken and just pretty much an explanation of all the calculations that were achieved through this experiment, including things like the length of the tape, the mass, separation distance, and the gravitational force, as well as the electric force. So we have our discussion questions right here. So this discussion questions essentially focus on generally just asking us whether or not the tape would repel to certain objects and attract to others. Essentially, the main idea here is if the tape is negatively charged, so it will repel other negative forces like the tape, which causes it to float, and then it will also be attractive to neutral forces, such as like my hand or a book, any sort of neutral force. So we have other discussion questions, and this is the end of the presentation. Thank you for watching.